Hi, and welcome to the Trusted Executive Podcast. I'm here with Dr. John Blakey, the founder of the Trusted Executive Foundation, which helps CEOs and leaders across all sectors around the globe create a new standard of leadership defined by trustworthiness. He's been named a top 100 global thought leader in trust by Trust Across America, and his work has been featured in Forbes, BBC News, Huff Post, and the Sunday Times. So welcome, John.
Morning, David. Great to be here again, talking about our third habit.
Yes, I'm very much looking forward to this. Now, those of you who listened before will know that the idea of this podcast is to help you as listeners gain a practical understanding of the potential benefits of the trusted executive model for you through taking a deep dive with each of the 9 leadership habits which underpin the model. Now, as you say in the book, John, I didn't just dream up these 9 habits over a glass of red wine. Indeed, they're a product of 6 years of evidence-based research at Aston Business School for your doctorate, involving over 500 board-level leaders. And with a deep passion, you offer the business world an academically rigorous and relevant answer to the question, how do I trust and why does it matter? So, John, from your research and as an introduction for those listening for the first time, why should they care about trust? And in a nutshell, what did you discover in your research?
Okay, so let's start with the big questions. Why should I care about trust? Well, it was Covey, I think, who said trust is the one thing that changes everything. And, you know, I've had the opportunity to research trust, and there are countless research papers that document the impact of trust on things ranging from productivity to mental well-being, to profitability, to creativity, to employee engagement. You name it, there's been a research paper somewhere that has drawn an audit trail from trust to a positive impact in business. So I do think it is the one thing that changes everything. And therefore, you know, for us as leaders, I think that magic wand of trust is something that, you know, we can all master and learn to do at the next level.
Thank you. And I think as we dive deeper with the third habit today, I think we start to see actually with this, the third habit today is choosing to be consistent, which sits under the pillar of ability. And I know when I've been looking at this one, it really has a sense of how it all starts then to come together for me, because as you said in the chapters, links to values. And as I said, I'm always drawn by this aspect for those listening for the first time, that the habits start with the word choosing. So this one is choosing to be consistent. And this makes this very intentional for me. It's not a one-off. And as you say, which I love, a habit is an accumulation of choices. So for you, John, what is this habit choosing to be consistent? And what benefits will it provide to an organization?
Yeah, consistency. Not the most glamorous of the 9 habits, to be fair, but very, very important. And maybe one of the ways to think about this habit and what it is to think about the opposite of what it is. So the opposite of consistent, being inconsistent. And nothing destroys trust as quickly as unpredictability of behavior. So when I was younger in my career, I remember working for a leader who prided himself on doing something different or saying something different on a Wednesday to what he did on a Tuesday to what he did on a Monday. And the theory was it kept you on your toes. And I think, yes, it worked where fear was the glue of the culture. You know, where fear is the glue, then being unpredictable, keeping people on their toes, you know, that's part of that way of leadership. But it's not the way of trustworthy leadership. If I don't know where I stand in relation to you, then it's going to be very difficult for me to trust you. So what I'm looking for is that predictability of behavior, that you respond consistently and reliably to situations and circumstances over a period of time, through the good times and through the bad times. And when I have that feeling of consistency of behavior, that's when I will feel psychologically safe and I will take more risks in that environment because it's a high trust environment. So that's why that consistency is so important in creating these psychologically safe, high trust environments.
I just remembered it. I'm trying to think of the author actually, but there's a book, Psychological Safety. And I remember from research, actually, I think it was Google that said of all the things they looked at, psychological safety was the most important for the efficiency, the effectiveness of their teams. So really this choosing to be consistent, it seems to be, as you said, it's almost at times innocuous, but my sense it's not, because as you said, this aspect of choosing to be consistent in your behaviors, I think when I was reflecting on it, really gets to get under the hood of what I call self-awareness. Because you know, if you're going to be consistent in your behaviors, for me, you need to start to tap into that set of being self-aware, which, as you know, John, is one of the things I look at around conscious leadership. So that's why I think choosing to be consistent is actually a lot deeper than it seems on the surface.
Yeah, and you reminded me of the difference between responding to a situation and reacting to a situation. Yeah. Because if you have that self-awareness, you have that ability to step back, make a choice. And this is why choosing to be consistent is important, that you make a choice to respond rather than reacting. Mm-hmm. So reacting implies that you're on autopilot. Your instinctive, reptilian brain has kicked in and hijacked the situation, and you've reacted. And if that reaction is not consistent with your normal choices, then people are going to feel unnerved by that. They're going to feel jarred by that, breaking out of that consistency of behavior. And that's when people start to feel psychologically unsafe, and it undermines trust.
And for me as well, once you bring in the self-awareness, something else I thought of is that actually this choosing to be consistent starts for me to bring in the, I'm going to call it the patriarchal system, as you said, and I've also worked under executives who like to see one of their traits as being disruptive and keeping people on their toes. But perhaps, and I've only just really thought of this, choosing to be consistent starts to bring in, because I'm now hearing the language around actually that everyone, whatever gender you are, has masculine and feminine traits. And for me, when someone's disruptive, and in particular the masculine, it can be what I call shadow masculine. But choosing to be consistent has a wonderful consistency for me of what I say, choosing also to be strong. If you look at the masculine traits we all have, also choosing to be caring from the more feminine traits, because I think when you choose to be consistent, there's an amount of care there for the staff. Because one thing I wanted to flag was that if people aren't trying to double guess you because you're consistent in your behaviors, for me, that's a caring aspect, because almost like the nervous system then relaxes a bit, because actually they know, they have a sense of how you're going to, as you said, respond as opposed to react. And they also have a sense of trust in you, because they know even if it's a difficult decision, there's a behavior set that actually they can rely on. So they can actually really then be with the difficult decisions and know actually we're in this together.
Yeah, and I think that's the link to values, that if you as a leader know what your values are and you have those to hand whenever you're facing a challenging decision or a challenging situation, and you ask yourself that question, how do I honor my values in this situation? Those values become that rock that allow you to demonstrate consistent behavior. So you think you can then become this values-led leader, and people might not have the same values as you, and they might not agree with your values. But if you are seen to be consistent around your values, then there's an honest proposition there in terms of, this is what I stand for. I stand for it on a Monday, a Tuesday, and a Wednesday. And if you stand for this as well, then maybe we could do something great together. And so clearly I stand for trust, and I often talk to people about, if you stand for trust, then I stand for trust, and that's a good basis because that's a shared value. But I obviously then need to be consistent in demonstrating that my words and my actions are consistent and aligned around those values.
Thank you. And I'm surprised actually just to touch the depth of this choosing to be consistent, because it almost feels like it's, I don't know if these are the right words, but like an invisible accountability buddy, that when you're consistent, it brings trust to the table almost. You're consistently bringing trust to the table, and you're being aware of that, and not just aware, I think, because I think once you become aware of something, you then ask the question, what is this? Why am I doing it? And there's a sense of actually, well, this is important because it actually supports the things that we're committing to as an organization. And I do want to come back to values, because I'm going to pick that up in a second about how executives use this leadership habit. But one other thing I want to just touch on before we go into how, and it's this choosing to be consistent. I'm loving this one, actually, because what I'm going to pull together is, we've already spoken about values, and we're going to come back to that in a second. But what's just coming to me, if you're choosing to be consistent, I think it then gets you to look at the key things in the organization. For example, if you're choosing to be consistent, for me as an organization, it then says, okay, what is our vision and our purpose? What are our values? And then, of course, what's the culture we have of this organization? So the big elements that quite often organizations struggle in pulling together, I think this choosing to be consistent, then I think encourages organizations to say, actually, what is our purpose and our vision, for example? Because if we're choosing to be consistent, either we need to have something we're consistent towards. What is our purpose of this organization? So I just thought of that. Choosing to be consistent starts asking this question. Yeah, okay, we've got values, but what about our purpose? Are we acting consistently towards that?
Yeah, and I think that links to one of the other habits, the evangelize habit, that, that habit number 7 in the model, evangelize, is where we talk about the importance of that vision and that inspiring purpose. And so these habits do need to be looked at alongside each other. It's easier to be consistent if you've got an inspiring purpose. The other thing I would say, David, about consistency is, we've talked a lot here about purpose, about relationships, culture. But consistency is absolutely key to results, to delivering results. I mean, one of the phrases I heard recently was, a brand is a promise of consistency. And so when I buy a Big Mac in Oslo Airport or in Paris Airport or in the United States, it's the same Big Mac. It's a consistent offering. It's a consistent product. So I think this consistency is key to relationships, but it's also key to driving results over a period of time. It's quite closely linked to discipline, and the idea that if you have a consistent process, a consistent brand, and that you stand by that for over a period of time, you are disciplined in that. It's also key to driving results, and we know that part of our triple bottom line, purpose for a high trust business is that we build great relationships, we have that brand reputation, but we also drive fantastic results.
Thank you. So it really feels to me, it's like a touchstone, isn't it? Choosing to be consistent. So I'm getting a sense, I hope those who are listening are probably getting a real sense of what the habit choosing to be consistent is, and how perhaps wide-ranging and interlinking with the other habits it is. But I also like to be curious from a practical perspective, asking, I hear this, but how are executives actually use this leadership habit to make a real difference in their organization? So I have recorded a short interview with Fiona Furman, who's the communications manager from the NHAL group, who have embedded the trusted executive model in their organization. And we're going to hear from her now, John, on how they've used the habit, choosing to be consistent. And I know you haven't heard this interview, so I look forward to your response. So once again, I'm with Fiona Furman, the communications manager with NAHL Group, a group of consumer legal businesses, including National Accident Helpline. And as an organisation, NAHL are using the Trusted Executive Framework to empower the way they work and serve their customers. So Fiona, how have you used this third leadership habit, choosing to be consistent, within NHAL to make a real difference in your organisation?
Sure. Hi, David. So looking back at the first lockdown that we had when COVID first hit, we made a commitment as a business very early on to ensure that we were able to be open and honest and consistent in our messaging with our staff. We gave our commitment to abiding by all of the government guidelines around and the health and safety guidelines around managing COVID, as well as our commitment to being transparent and honest in all our communications with staff. So whenever our leaders were speaking to staff, they consistently gave those messages so that staff knew exactly where they stood. It wasn't shifting sands, things weren't moving around, but they knew that our commitment was to them and to our business. Unfortunately, as with many businesses, we had a number of colleagues who we needed to place on the furlough system. And again, that we were so conscious that they were as important a part of what our business was doing to get through this situation as the people who were working all the way through, and that message was consistently given. So it was just really important for us in that situation that our colleagues all had consistent messaging, that they all knew how valuable, that everyone had the same level of value to the business in that situation, and we worked really, really hard to make sure that that was the case.
And for you, what's been a personal insight or a personal growth moment through choosing to be consistent leadership habits at this time?
Yeah, I mean, I think throughout my time at NHL Group, the consistency has been a real differentiator for me. I think probably we've all worked in businesses that don't show that level of consistency, and I think it can be quite damaging. I think for me, when I've worked in businesses where there isn't that consistency, it's so destabilizing, and it's destabilizing to the point where it actually can make it quite challenging for you to just do your job, because you're second guessing things all the time. You're trying to read between the lines of things, and that's time consuming, and it takes energy, and it takes away peace in a way as well. It doesn't give you that kind of peace and contentment that you need in order to be able to do the best job that you can. And so I found that during this time that consistency of message and behaviour and visibility of our leaders especially has been really critical in enabling me to do my day-to-day job. I love my role. So I'm responsible for staff engagement in our business. And so I think I know how long it takes to build up trust and to build up that sense of consistency and contentment and staff engagement within a business. And I know how quickly it can be lost as well.
Thank you ever so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
John, there's Fiona on choosing to be consistent. I'd love to hear your response to what she said.
Yeah, it's always interesting listening to people who have actually been working with the model in the front line, particularly obviously in the front line of lockdown. So Fiona reminded us of communication and the importance of consistency in communication and messaging. And that's something I think that in this pandemic in particular, whether it's as a government or as a business leader, that consistency of messaging, is critical, particularly in times of crisis, if you're going to keep the trust with people. Fiona also talked about, it was very interesting when she talked about second guessing, when you're in a situation where you're trying to second guess everything, and she said it can take away your peace. I think at one point she actually used that phrase, it can take away your peace. And I think she's exactly right. It links back to what we talked about, psychological safety. I think when you talk about taking away your peace, it basically means that you've not got that feeling of psychological safety. And it links a little bit, David, to highly political cultures. I think inconsistent behavior is a breeding ground for politics, and we all have worked in highly politicized businesses or organizations. And as Fiona says, the amount of energy and talent that's wasted through politicking, in organizational cultures like that, we've all, I think, felt the pain of that. We've all lost the peace, in those environments. And so I think anybody who wants to try and build something different, then hopefully this habit is part of how you can minimize the politicking in organizations by maximizing that consistency of behavior.
Totally, yes. There were some wonderful things in there that she said. We were speaking earlier in the podcast about being aware, and I don't know if you noticed, she said actually we were very conscious about choosing to be consistent, and spoke about when colleagues went on furlough, which really got me thinking about, as we were talking about earlier, it brought to the table this caring aspect of, the choosing to be consistent. They were choosing to be consistent around caring for their staff at this difficult time during the pandemic. And one thing I like, which reminded me of what you said in the book, is you talk about in the book about values and how you can look at values from when they're in peak moments and also when they're in moments of despair. And I always say that when times are difficult, that's when the values really get tested. So I had a sense really in this pandemic time when they're responding to it, there was a sense they really stepped into these habits. It helped them to actually find a North Star, to find a guiding point. In this respect, choosing to be consistent meant that actually they were, as she said, there was consistency of message, of behavior, of visibility. And I love that because A, they were conscious in choosing it, but two, actually, it just for me says actually there's so many benefits from this model, but actually it's perhaps not always easy to implement, because sometimes it can sound easy, oh, I'll choose to be consistent. But actually they chose, and as you said, there was some discipline around sticking to that because it really mattered to them.
Yeah, definitely.
And the final thing, what she said right at the end there, which I loved, was actually she said, she realizes how it takes time to build trust and takes time to build trust around consistency. And as you said before, how it can be lost very quickly. So, which leads us up into the next one, really. The next point I wanted to ask is that we're looking at this habit, but there's a point where we say, how does this habit, choosing to be consistent, work alongside the other habits in the model?
Yeah, I think if I think about choosing to be consistent and then what other habits in the model do we link to, I think we've talked about delivery, that a brand is a promise of consistency. And so consistent delivery day in, day out, I think that is key to the discipline of any successful business. So I think there is definitely a link between delivery and consistency. You mentioned about care, consistency and care. Well, that habit number 9 is the habit of being kind. So I think there is a sort of link there that we've got to sort of balance this consistency across all of that triple bottom line of results, relationships, and reputation. We need to apply that consistency across all these habits. So we could say for all the habits, couldn't we? If you're honest 9 days out of 10 and dishonest on the 10th day, or if you're kind 9 days out of 10 and cruel on the 10th day, if you deliver 9 days out of 10 and you don't deliver on the 10th day, this lack of consistency is going to be a liability on any habit if we're not aware of, particularly I think in the current climate, people are very cynical. People are looking to catch you as a leader getting it wrong. I mean, that might sound, why do they want to do that? But that's just I think the reality of the leadership role, that you are under scrutiny. People are watching you, and if they will choose to remember that one day that you didn't do the habit rather than the 9 days that you did do it. So I think it just underlines that for all 9 habits, being consistent, and obviously we all make mistakes. There's going to be slip ups, and we'll maybe talk about that in a minute. But just recognizing how key it is to have that consistency and maximize that consistency across all 9 habits.
Thank you, John. Yes, we'll have a look at it in a second. And what just came to my mind, of course, and you're quite right. Every organization, every individual makes slips up, makes mistakes. But perhaps, and we'll have a look at in a second, there's some consistency around how you may choose to respond to that as well. So it helps that. So John, we've covered a lot of ground. So how can, for listeners out there, what further resources or hands-on experience of this habit, choosing to be consistent, would you recommend them to try out to help them make a real difference for their organization?
Yeah, well, I was thinking about this before, David, and I don't know many books with the leadership books with the word consistency in the title. I was thinking, have I ever seen a book called, How to Be the Consistent Leader? I don't think I have, and maybe there's an opportunity there for someone. So I can't immediately think of books, but what I'm thinking of resources here is probably an exercise. There's an exercise that I'd like to share with our listeners, because it's been such a powerful exercise for me over the last 12 years that I've used it. And you alluded to it in the earlier in the podcast, that in the book I talk about how key it is to understand your values, and do we actually know what our values are? I had a coaching session, as I say, 12 years ago with a great coach who took me through an exercise that elicited my values. And it wasn't just an exercise where she gave me a tick list and said, tick the ones that you like the sound of. She actually took me through an experience and helped me think about the peak experiences in my life and the difficult days in my life, and through reflecting on those, discerning what my values were. And I've kept a list of those values ever since that day. And every Sunday evening, before I go into my working week, I open my Evernote app and I look in this note where it's titled, how will I honor my values this week? And I have those values listed, and I look at my diary, and I try and see where are the opportunities for me to be courageous, which is one of my values. Where are the opportunities for me to share? So this podcast, for me, it's honoring my value of sharing. Where are the opportunities for me to have fun? Because fun is one of my values. So and I quote it in the book that Roy Disney says, you know, it's easy to make decisions when you know what your values are. But do you know what your values are? I would encourage all the listeners to challenge themselves to dig out those values and to do it through a process of reflection and coaching. There is an exercise in the book that would help people with this, because until you know what they are, you can't use them as a decision-making tool. But the day that you do know what they are, you can use them as this very practical decision-making tool that helps you deliver and build a habit of consistency over a period of time.
Thank you. And if I remember correctly, I think in the book, you talk about, for the Trusted Executive Foundation, how you have, I think the words used, you have take turns to be like the guardian of the habits. Is that right? You have a meeting and you just check in as to how well you've actually measured up to the values, or is that correct? Is that one way you use this?
Yeah, we have a 9 Habits Guardian, and in our gatherings of our Trusted Executive Fellowship boards, we ask someone to play that role. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the meeting, they feed back to us how they think we fared against the habits. What did we do well? What did we do not so well? Because the other great resource for anybody working on this habit is feedback. Yep. You know, are you getting feedback on your ability to live by your values consistently? And very few leaders get feedback on that. You know, people get feedback on everything else just about, but do you get feedback on whether you're living by your values? And things like that, that 9 Habits Guardian role is a simple way to invite feedback into those teams and for those individuals.
Thank you, John. I think that's a great point, because quite often when I go into organizations, when they're open and honest to the habits, they will quite often say we struggle to actually embody the values we have. We think the values are valuable, but we struggle to embody them. So that's a really good tip. And one final question, because this podcast is a deep dive, and quite often I get a sense of perhaps listeners are going, David, ask John this question, because it's really want to know the answer to this one. So this is one that's just come to me, and it's quite a deep question actually, but I'm going to ask it because it's choosing to be consistent. So here's an exec that comes to you, John, and says, John, love this aspect, but you're talking about John choosing to be consistent. And he or she might say, but how do I choose to be consistent when I'm looking at the 9 habits, which I like? We then have our own corporate values, which are different to the habits. And then I've got my individual habits, which I notice can be quite different to those. So, John, how can I choose to be consistent across the 9 habits, across the corporate values, and across my own individual values? How does this work? Help me, John.
Yeah. And as a coach, I often, in fact, after people have done that exercise of working out what their values are, often they then start comparing those values to the values of their organization. And clearly there's sometimes not a perfect match. Now, I think it's good to be aware of those differences and to be conscious of those differences. And over time, I think leaders look for environments that are consistent with their own values. The more alignment you can get between your individual values, the values of your team, the values of your organization, the more alignment you can get around values, the easier it is going to be consistent in that environment. Now, it's not a perfect world. We know there's going to be gaps and mismatches at times. And that's where the other habits, I think, are going to come in terms of making sure that over time you can handle that. For example, the habit of being humble. You know, who are you to impose your values on the rest of the organization? So there is a humility around accepting that other people have values. And you know, we are working in a multi-value environment. So I think, yeah, we're seeking to get alignment wherever possible, but we're also living in the real world where there will be mismatches. And I do think that's where the other habits of trust will come into play. Otherwise, consistency risks being overdone and becoming dogma, and becoming stubbornness, and becoming, you know, all those other aspects that obviously are going to start to undermine trust. And it's very interesting. One of our clients at the moment is opening our eyes to the fact that you can overdo a habit. You know, you can start to overdo it. There is a zone in which it's optimized, but if you actually elevate that habit and make a sort of a religion out of it, yes. you're going to find that it will undermine other habits in the model.
Thank you, John. That's a wonderful answer. And also, as you were speaking, what came to me is that when you work with these, as you said, it doesn't have to be a perfect alignment. But for me, actually, I can then understand perhaps why this value or this habit is important to someone else. And it can actually help me shift perceptions. I can then perhaps grow out of that. So thank you for that response. I hadn't thought of that, so I really appreciate that. So we've touched on this, and this was about actually, we've spoken a lot about choosing to be consistent and how you've grounded this in research and how Fiona is using it and the impact it has. But you also talk in the book, there's a book about cracks in the pillar and about what to do when things go wrong. And this is a grounded realism for me. It's gritty, and I know that you're a pragmatist who walks the talk, and I honour that. So I just want to ask you the question, in relation to choosing to be consistent, what can an organisation do when things go wrong with this habit?
Yeah, and you know, we are going to hit that day, you know, when things go wrong with consistency. Typically, that's triggered by stress. So whether it's at an individual level or an organizational level, in a crisis, we are much more likely to react than respond. And that's when we're maybe going to go to that instinctive fight or flight sort of response. And that's what could undermine this consistency. And if we find ourselves having got sort of tempted into that situation, then I think, as I say in the book, we always look at the other habits to see which other habit can help us when things go wrong with one habit. So let's imagine we've undermined our reputation for consistency. I think the habits of integrity certainly come into play there. Be honest, be open, be humble. So, you know, accept that you've made a mistake, fess up on that, you know, if necessary, have a conversation with the people involved to apologize, to explain, to help them try and understand, you know, the circumstances that you were in that prompted you to react the way you did. And of course, the habit of kindness is always a great habit to look to reach for when things go wrong, because a well-timed note of thanks or a well-timed small gift of appreciation can work wonders in terms of you know, healing any damage that might have been done from that slip of inconsistency. So I think those are the main habits I would talk about, David, in terms of how to recover on those inevitable days when you might experience that you reacted a bit out of character and undermine that consistency.
Thank you, John. And I think it probably isn't part of the culture organisation that's using these habits, as you know, to know that things will go wrong at times. And you said it's then how you choose to respond that can actually then support the recovery. And as we've spoken before, I think another podcast can even, I think it was a delivery one, choosing to deliver, how it can even then deepen trust as a result.
Yeah.
So John, we're moving to what my favourite part. We've kind of looked at, you know, what's the habit is and how listeners can use it. And this one is a deep dive into why this habit matters to you. And I know you've spent a long time researching and developing this model in your PhD and in your career. And of course, you've had a successful ongoing career as both a leader and world-class coach. So really looking at choosing to be consistent, let's just dive a bit deeper with this as to why this habit is personally matters to you. And we spoke before, there's kind of two levels. There's one personally, and then there's one around perhaps, you know, the spiritual perspective for you. So in this part, I'm just going to invite you to explore both, if you like, and just go a bit deeper in this as to why this is important to you, choosing to be consistent.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is your favourite part of the podcast. It's always the part of the podcast where I draw a deep breath. But let's go for it. Yeah, why is this important to me personally? I listened to a great talker recently, a lady called Razia Aziz. It was actually on a topic of diversity, and she said in that speech about we've all got a beast in the basement. It was a very powerful phrase, which everybody discussed at the time. And, you know, I've got a beast in the basement. You've got a beast in the basement. And when I talk about reacting and that instinctive reptilian brain that kicks in, you know, with the fight or flight, that's typically when the beast in the basement gets mobilized. And I know I've got that in me, and I've had it in me over the years. And I know that there are times when I react, and I can react in a way that people around me think is, hang on a minute, where did that come from? You know, that's not the John that we thought we knew. So I've experienced how jarring that is for people, and how much it unsettles people in my sphere of leadership. And I've done a lot of work with coaches and on myself over the years to understand the nature of that beast in the basement. And I have got to a stage in my life now where I know where that comes from. I know the sort of childhood sort of events that prompted me to be oversensitive to certain situations and therefore to react because I didn't feel safe. And you know, back then when those events happened, you know, it as a child, it was right that I didn't feel safe and that I didn't know what to do, and therefore I react, you know. But as an adult and as a leader, the more aware we can become of the reality of, you know, what is that part of us, and where does it come from, and how do we over time become more and more aware of that, and therefore less likely to be hijacked by that. That's why this habit is particularly important to me, because I recognize in my own leadership, you know, that's something that I've had to work very hard at to and still work at today, in terms of trying to understand where there is that temptation to react rather than respond.
Well, I'm taking a breath there, John, because that is a deep dive and a very vulnerable dive. So thank you. And I really relate to that, really do, because it's an important one. I think it's a really important one for leaders, because it's this sense of these triggers, as you said, that we can carry from child, and something may happen in a meeting, may happen in a chance conversation when we're back at work together around the water cooler, or some event happens that we kind of feel perhaps there's an anger that comes, or there's something that comes, as you said, that then we act out of the character.
Yeah.
But to bring that awareness to that, to know, as I say, to have that self-compassion, to know that actually there's something here that I'm responding to childhood. And I think some psychologists say these results, they're 90% a result of a past childhood event. To bring that awareness to it, to do some inner work, as you said, on that is something that's very powerful. So what a beautiful share, because it just shows to me perhaps why I'm feeling the depth of this habit, which has surprised me, because I think perhaps underneath this habit, as you said, the beast in the basement, there are some really deep senses. So thank you for bringing this to light. That's a point of real depth. And I think from this point of real depth, I will ask you actually around, we know that the model, or from where you come, your perspective, there's a respecting of all faith traditions. But if we're looking at the Christian tradition, where for you, we asked the question, where did Jesus actually, from your perspective, where was he choosing to be consistent?
Yeah, it's an interesting thought, isn't it? Again, I don't think there's been a book written, Jesus, the consistent leader. But when you look at Jesus and you look at the story of Jesus, he was incredibly consistent, incredibly reliable. I mean, he performed miracles every day. He didn't perform them on a Monday and Tuesday, and then he failed on the Wednesday. And he prayed consistently.
Yes. Yeah.
And he had that mission, as you said earlier. He knew what his mission was, and he was consistently obedient to that mission. Mm. So I think it's been really interesting for me to think about this habit in relation to Jesus. And of course, there were two moments in Jesus' life that we know about, that where he was particularly put under pressure, I think, around consistency. I think the first time was when he spent 40 days in the wilderness, and the devil tempts Jesus to betray and be inconsistent to his purpose and his mission. And he gets sorely tested. He's put under huge pressure. And of course, he passes that test. Then later in his life, as he's awaiting sort of crucifixion, and he knows that he's about to sort of fulfill his mission, we see Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, and again he's tested, and there's a beautiful sort of point, Luke 22 verse 42, where he says, Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me, but let your will, not mine, be done. So we see Jesus faltering and almost being tempted to sort of say, I'm about to drop the baton here. I'm about to sort of have that moment, but he still says, no, let your will be done. And he still manages to overcome that temptation in that moment, so that he consistently fulfills the plan. So as I've thought about Jesus in relation to this habit, I've realized that he is, of all the things that he was, he also was incredibly consistent, disciplined. He was tempted. He was put under huge stress, but he did sort of fulfill his consistency of his mission and his values. And therefore we know where we stand in relation to him, and that's a hugely reassuring thing for anybody like myself who has a faith, that we know where we stand in relation to Jesus.
Absolutely. And there's something about that. And John, I think around this choosing to be consistent, I always say to people that when I have a look at the New Testament passages, the gospel ones, it still amazes me how many times peppered in there is that Jesus went off to a quiet place to pray. It's in a number of times. I always think, from my own perspective, do you know what? He must have been consistent around going off to pray, because it's always mentioned in there. And I think it taps into your last deep answer, that actually he was tapped into this source of knowing that it was really important to refresh himself by being related to prayer and choosing to be consistent. What I thought of is I love the Christian monastic traditions. Of course, part of theirs is having this regular time of prayer during the day, whether it's first thing, midday, evening, and nighttime, offering a rhythm of prayer, which is consistent, which really kind of resources their day. And that feels important. And also I was going to bring in, because I thought as well, another community I know, the Zen Buddhist Thich Nhat Hanh, he has their 5 mindfulness trainings. And when you look at the mindfulness trainings, those are really just guideposts as to how am I choosing to be consistent in my life to the things that really matter to me, and matter to me being part of this community. Not as a straitjacket, but as a way that someone once said to me, is this interesting? Is this habit, does it liberate you, or does it constrict you? So I think the choosing to be consistent can be, someone might say, actually that's going to restrict me. But I would like to say that actually choosing to be consistent in some ways can actually help to liberate people. Because I think, looking at the faith, Jesus choosing to be consistent, I think liberated not only himself, but those that were following him as well. Because as you said, they could actually really deeply trust him, which in itself, I think, I haven't just thought of this, trust is so deeply liberating, I believe, in the environment.
Yep, spot on.
Wonderful. Now, John, finally on this one, we've spoken before, that you've got your book, Coaching Poetry from a Spiritual Path, where you say, whatever your own religious beliefs, these poems will challenge you to think deeply and inspire you to take the next step on your own spiritual path, your leadership path. So as we do, I invite you to share one of the poems from your book, which you think is relevant and pertinent to this habit of choosing to be consistent.
Yeah, thank you, David. So yeah, I had to think about this, and I was thinking about our conversation about why is this habit important to me, the beast in the basement, the idea of responding versus reacting, and we talked about the fight or flight response that we can be tempted into in those times of stress. And so the poem that I'm choosing to share today on this habit is actually called Fight, Flight, or Forgiveness. Because I think forgiveness is a choice. Fighting and running away is a reaction. Forgiveness is a response. And so I'll just share this this poem as a way of thinking about consistency and how we are tempted at times to fight or flight. These blows we are feeling, which still feel real, and they hurt and swell with pain. They tempt us to run away or to stand and fight and brawl, for we think it is real, and yet we can let it happen. Like watching a movie scene, we can be author, not actor, in this dream, distant and observant and still, whilst the blows are raining down and your ego is screaming for revenge. And then the rage passes like an impersonal storm that dies. And you have not fought nor run away. You are still standing. It was not real. And now, with the energy of forgiveness flowing in your limbs, you move forward again as a leader in this world.
Beautiful, beautiful, John. And I'm taking another breath here, John. That's moved me. Thank you. This habit shouldn't be consistent. I'm just really tapping into the depth of this one, because what I got from that poem is actually, as a leader, choosing to be consistent actually does mean choosing to be there, as you said, not to react, not to flee, but to actually truly be in that situation, and quite often that difficult situation. And as you said, that may well involve forgiveness. But I think actually, John, it's when you're choosing to stay in that difficult situation, not only does it support the business, I'm just tapping into that develops trust from those that are with you, because they know that actually you're not going to react and flee. You're actually right here. You may not have the answer. That's what's coming to me. But actually, as a leader, you're kind of saying, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, as you said, there is great liberation in that. And if the leader can bring that to a situation, it probably frees everybody up to make new choices, which is exactly where we started this conversation, is the choice that you're making in the present moment, and whether that is a choice that builds trust, or are you making choices that might be repeating patterns of distrust in your own or other people's lives.
Totally, yes. And just one final point from me, because I just remember one in my own corporate career where a decision was made in the organization to make a number of people redundant. And it meant that when a number of people left the organization, we suddenly realized we'd lost some key skill sets, and some of the accounting systems went down as a result of this, because we'd lost some knowledge and information. And just for me, choosing to be consistent in that moment was not running, was just saying to my team, being honest and open, saying this is really difficult, but we're going to find a way through this. And I have a few ideas. I want to listen to what you're saying as well. And just in that moment, John, just choosing to be with that, being consistent with saying it's hard and we're going to get through it. Do you know what? Something just shifted, and it took us a while, but we did get through it. And coming back to you, I've probably still got it somewhere. The financial controller, the group financial controller, sent me a lovely letter when it had closed, just to say thank you, David, and to your team for actually stepping in and managing the situation, because I realized it was not easy.
Yeah. People will really notice that if you are, when, it's the quote, isn't it? I think, is it Kipling, about when all around you are losing their heads? If you can be the one that is still able to think it through and make that consistent decision. I think that people will remember those moments, particularly, as I say, in a crisis situation.
Thank you, John. Now, finally, for those listening, as where they can go to explore and learn more about the 9 habits of trust, and perhaps how they get in touch with a keynote or workshop program or sign up for a newsletter, where should they go, John?
Yeah, the book obviously is available via Amazon. The website is www.trustedexecutive.com. So trustedexecutive.com. All sorts of resources on that website, as well as next steps if people want to explore this model more deeply. There's a YouTube playlist. I think there's something like 50 videos on that playlist now, Trusted Executive playlist, where again we have exploration of the model and the habits in more detail. So I hope that those are a few pointers for people if they want to dig a bit deeper.
Thank you, and I'll put links in the notes below so people can access that. And John, I just want to say thank you. This has been a wonderful podcast. Thank you for stepping out with this into the business world with a real heart. I've really felt that today, and a passion for supporting businesses and their people to be the best they very can be. So I invite you just to say a few closing words to those listening.
Yeah, thank you for listening. I hope that there was one thing, if there's one thing in that sort of 50 minutes that was that insight or that moment of awareness for you, then that's what this is all about. It's about you taking that next step and just being alert to where might you go next, particularly with this habit of consistency, whether that's an exercise or doing a bit of reading or reflecting on your own experience and your own career. So I just hope that people are taking away that one thing, and I encourage people to sort of take that next step, because as we often say, that these habits, it's about working the muscle of the habit, and unless we work the muscle of the habit, we don't build that strength over time. So it's whatever that next step is. I just encourage people to think of a next step from this podcast that they could take to continue to build this habit of consistency.
Thank you, John. And I'm just reminding those listening that habit number 4 for next time is choosing to be honest. So indeed, until next time, may everyone listening have a wonderful day.
Thank you.